and was only suitable for people aged 18 or over, will almost certainly have an adult theme, and might well contain sex or violence, which are quite graphic. It may also contain explicit language, including sexual swear words. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, my mom said she'd listened to our Halloween episode. She's like, me and your dad were listening to it, and I had to turn it off. You say fuck way too many times. She didn't say it like that. She didn't say I say fuck way. I added that part in. But here's what his revelation comes to him. And he's kind of got all this stuff like touching, wiping, mourning of the animals.
Not wiping, whipping.
Yeah. Also not touching.
I am dyslexic. I hope I'm not having like a stroke.
Do it live! Fuck it! Do it live!
And an atheist almost always becomes supporters of eugenics and abortion.
A swine is hungry for nuts. Jesus hates them too.
Satan is real.
Being a Satanist is an open declaration of revolt against counterproductive received wisdom and mindless rogue traditions.
Decapitate her head off.
We're done. You're done.
Obama!
Welcome to the Godless Rebelution. Today is Monday, November 7th. I'm Dan Ellis, in studio with, once again, the lovely Mr. Duffy.
Oh, thank you.
With no longer a porn stash and new eyewear.
Yeah, I had to get rid of the porn stash. It was too itchy and rapey looking.
Rapey looking for sure. I expected
but I didn't trump anyone.
So I expected that when I saw you at the door, when I answered the door and you had the porn stash, I looked over your shoulder to see if you had actually bought the rape van to accompany the mustache.
Well, it was supposed to be a camera van, not like a serial killer rape van.
Well, full of cameras to film your snuff porn.
You gotta have cameras for snuff porn.
Oh, that's funny. We are once again this week without Mr. Matthew.
Still trying to get educated.
Yeah. Apparently that's going well for him.
Yeah.
But we are joined in studio tonight by Mr. Mithrin.
Hello, everybody.
From the Reddit. I read stuff on Reddit when people will send me links and stuff, but I still don't quite understand it. Like it's this foreign thing to me.
It's okay. It's kind of like a BBS. It's a little bit like weird and esoteric, and I kind of grew up in that culture, so I think it appeals to people who like to read very plain text with no fanciness, and cats. That's kind of your market right there.
And you are one of the moderators for, and a fairly prolific poster on the is it ex-Mormon?
Yeah, the ex-Mormon subreddit. I actually started, this is kind of a good place to even begin. So I just had notes. I was working a job at an airline, and if you know anything about airlines, everyone has two jobs. They sell Tupperware, they make jewelry, and I was living out of my in-laws' house, so I had lots of time. So I decided my second job was to answer some of those questions I had on my mission.
So these are like second jobs, like people in L.A. are actors and waitresses.
Exactly. Exactly like that. Except for these are like people who do all the marketing metrics for an airline and sell Tupperware to everyone who sits next to them. But I would answer some of these questions, and so I started to, I collected 3 years of notes, and at some point I wanted to collect them somewhere, so I just started to post them on the Mormon subreddit. And like no one cared, and so I posted them on the LDS one, and they all said you're an anti-Mormon. And I was like, I don't think so. I teach Elders Quorum every week. And then I also posted them on the ex-Mormon subreddit, and people there would say, that's great. Did you also know this? And I could get through the notes faster and find more. So I started to post more and more there until eventually, that's my main stomping ground these days. So there you go. That's kind of how I ended up on Reddit. Actually, it's BYU connected. There was a guy who came and spoke at the BYU alumni group, and he said, he was a CEO of some company. He said, I've just been from this investment firm. We do this venture capital thing, and there's a few things I think are going to be big. One of them is this thing called Bluetooth. You should look into that. I think it's going to be big someday. Blackberries look like they're going to be...
The Danes are onto something with the Bluetooth.
That's right. Blackberries. I'm really digging my Blackberry. And I read something on Reddit. And so I went back to the office and pulled up Reddit, and the rest, as they say, is history. So it was part of the venture capital time before they split out to the multiple subreddits.
Okay.
And my original name is no longer used. So, because it was all pro LDS stuff. So there you go. There's a little history.
So what was your original name?
We won't go there because it's tied to all sorts of other things that we will not discuss.
I see.
It sounds like a fun rabbit hole to go down, though.
It probably is. You could probably find out my high score at like Minesweeper from that username because it was pretty much everything online for a very long time.
Okay.
And then when I was working for a company and we had a little bit of internal trouble, which involved federal agents and things like that. And we came up to Utah.
Was this one of Utah's famous MLMs?
No, this was down in Texas, and they were legitimately doing some very questionable things with the federal government. And we came back up to Utah, and I decided I needed a new online name.
So you weren't in the Branch Davidian, were you?
No, but they were down there while I was down there. We actually went and drove by the compound and saw the concrete, and I had this strong impression, because I was a very believing member at the time, that they were going to be raided by the federal government, and I should go, like, warn them like Samuel the Lamanite up on the wall. And I didn't heed that, and the government came in and got him, so I guess I failed at that calling.
I think that was very predictable, being with the kind of people they were.
Well, they did build the thing to take bullets. I don't think it was a big leap of faith to believe that they were doing something the government would eventually
these people
show
are
up
building
on.
a castle to hold themselves inside of it. Something's up here.
A fortress,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what was I saying right before that?
You came back up to Salt Lake.
And I looked at the textbook next to me, and the guy's name was actually Mithrin. And I was like, that's the most awesome name ever. I'm going to use that online until I can use my old one, because all that stuff is done. And it's stuck. So there you go. There's the founding of Mithrin.
Oh, so you were previously a true believing Mormon.
Absolutely.
You were all in.
All in. I was LDS mission to Sweden. Still fortfarande kan prata svenska, and I still keep up with those guys over there.
Excuse you.
Yeah, thank you. Schmurndi.
That's the Swedish I know.
Yeah. I was Elders Quorum president twice. I was Elders Quorum instructor for 7.5 years. My father wanted us all to become to work with FAIR if we were like lesser, and the Maxwell Institute if we really did it right.
And FAIR is the
FAIR Mormon is the apologists that can't publish in actual scientific journals. Anything that doesn't quite make it to that level gets published online by them.
What does FAIR is an acronym for something, right? I can't remember.
It is, but I don't remember because it's a stretch.
But it's a Mormon apologist website, basically, or a group. Yeah.
Hugh Nibley was a friend of the family. He was supposed to be at my oldest daughter's like baby blessing, but this was way late just before he died, and he couldn't find the door. He found it and it was locked, and so he just wandered home. He wasn't all the way coherent, but it was,
but still a leading member of the church.
That's right. And still revealing new things all the time, which I thought a fascinating combination once you actually knew him, that he was not able to find a door, but was still publishing.
Polydent is the best denture adhesive in the world, so saith the Lord.
And they used it in ancient Egypt. Isis. She was a big fan. Anyway, so there's my sister was supposed to be an archaeologist, and after a year of studying to please Dad, she's like, I hate this. I am not doing this anymore. I was like, what do you want to do? And she became she works at junior highs teaching home ec and has been happy ever since. But anyway, if you wanted time with Dad, you studied Cortez's journal. You talked about how Nephite cities and Chichen Itza and I probably massacred the name there. Dad would hate it. But, so anyway, we're all headed for that sort of goal. And so I put lots and lots of hours. I decided I was going to do modern church history because other children had taken either New Testament and Greek, or Book of Mormon lands or whatever. This was going to be my niche, was Joseph Smith.
The one people weren't doing.
That's right. And I wondered why no one did. And then I ended up out doing this. So that kind of says an awful lot, I think.
I think it's that so many people start out thinking, why is nobody doing this? And then they start learning more and more and more and going, oh, fuck it. Now I'm out of the church. Damn it.
Pretty close. I was, no, that's pretty much what happened.
So what do you do? What do you do on the ex-Mormon Reddit group?
Well, so I'm a moderator right now, and I was a moderator before, and I never wanted to be a moderator, but one day they just kind of made me one, and I was like, okay, I guess that's what I'll do. And pretty much everyone hates moderators, right? They're just the people who tell you to stop saying things, and so I get a lot of hate from that. But the biggest things I'm probably known for, I have a blog called exploringmormonism.com, and I've posted on there my best timelines, but I started doing timelines. That was the thing that got me going, that I never seen anyone do. And I really want, if anyone out there is really creative, I'd love to be able to lay one timeline over the other, because I think it really tells a lot of stories. I think the whole History Channel could use it, as well as any number of schools. But when it comes to Mormon history, being able to take like what the official church story is, and then line up actual events, I think it suddenly tells a whole different story.
Yeah.
So I just started to compile those things just to try to understand it as I was going through my own study. And things start falling apart really fast. You start to notice that they are changing dates. They are hiding details. They'll put one thing before another in the lesson manual. And there's one day I was preparing a lesson. This is a little off topic, but it's fun. In the Brigham Young manual for Elders Quorum, and I looked at the quote, and it said something along the lines of, I don't remember the exact quote, but eternal marriage is ... essential for our salvation. I was like, yeah, anti-Mormons do the ellipses thing, the ... What's the actual quote? So I went into they had a source at the bottom, and it was Deseret News, 1977. I'm like, Brigham Young said nothing in 1977. No. He was dead. So then I looked that one up, and it had a link to the, what was the name of it? One of the manuals, anyway, from 1976. I'm like, no, he didn't say anything in 1976 either. More or less, I mean, it was Mormon, so darn it, I'm going to the internet, typed in the quote into Google exactly as they had it. It pops up, and it said, eternal marriage, which is polygamy, is essential for eternal life. And I'm like, okay, whoever did that knew. This was not an accidental, we cut out a piece. This was, and that was really...
The word polygamy needs to be replaced with ellipses, because otherwise people might freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the beginning of the end of because I started to look into all the ellipses, and that is for a while.
That's a very common thing they do then, I'm guessing, is instead of being like, oh no, the doctrine hasn't changed, we just ellipses the words.
Exactly. So there was something that Dan, that's where you found me. I was doing a Nutty Mormon history that was all based around things I had found while looking at ellipses, and all the crazy stories that come pouring out of the stuff that's in the current manuals that just is hidden by ellipses. Things from Lorenzo Snow's Visit in the Temple. I don't know if you've... I don't know.
No.
Do you want to just go into crazy? Let's go into crazy.
Yes. Well,
let's give people crazy.
Well, and real quick, so you mentioned that's where I found you, and just so people know our history a little bit, back when I was serving as president for Atheists of Utah, we had you come and speak at one of our brunches.
Yeah.
At... What the hell was the name of that bar?
Sizzler? I would think.
Legends.
Legends.
Yes,
it's like
Legends.
Sizzler's not a bar.
Down by Broovies.
Yeah, the sports bar next to Broovies. And that was a great time, man. I had a really good time just hearing all of this wacky shit from the LDS Church. Like, I know a lot of wacky shit about the LDS Church, but some of the things you were presenting, I was just like, holy shit. Like, I knew that, and I know that it's fucking out there crazy, but yeah, some of the things you were telling us, I was like, holy shit.
So we had a game on Reddit. I guess this is really where things started for like being famous on the ex-Mormon subreddit, where I said, okay, you find the craziest, most batshit thing that you have ever heard, and I will provide the general authority source for it. And to this date, we've done it 3 times, and I've only had one that was not actually sourced from a general authority. So
really,
there's an awful lot of crazy out there, but and it was tons of fun, and so that's where a lot of again, those sorts of things started. But so Lorenzo Snow, there's a famous story, and the first time I heard it was in seminary. Again, I try to go with all my sources from LDS sources. I'm not going anywhere outside. I do a little bit if you have to, because sometimes they will have nixed someone who was legitimately in the church. But I try to go as much as I can with legitimate sources.
So who is Lorenzo Snow?
Lorenzo Snow.
Or who was Lorenzo Snow?
Was the fifth prophet. He's of the LDS Church. He had the big long beard, and he instituted tithing. And in seminary, there was someone who said, or the seminary teacher said, people ask where Jesus stood when Lorenzo Snow saw him in the temple. I was in the St. George Temple, and the temple person said he stood many places in the St. George Temple. I'm like, that's kind of a weird thing to bring up. What do you mean when Jesus stood in the temple? So I looked that up, and it turns out that when Wilford Woodruff died, and there's a whole band of crazy around Wilford Woodruff's death, but when Wilford Woodruff died, Lorenzo Snow was panicked because the church is deep in debt, and it's deep into debt into banks in the Far East. Mostly because they believed that the world was going to end in 1890, and so they took out loans like the world was going to end in 1890.
Well, it is the Church of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, right. It stands to reason. And Joseph had given the little prophecy in the Doctrine and Covenants that if you live to be 80, and they had taken that very literally for a good long while. And there's some memos going back and forth that I've seen where they are talking about, well, go ahead and get the finances. We'll basically, just like Egypt leaving, or the children of Israel leaving Egypt and borrowing gold from all of their neighbors, that they were taking out giant loans for the same sort of idea. The world's going to end, you might as well. Well, they were all coming due, and the prophet's dead, and so he goes to the temple to ask what should happen with his granddaughter, and his granddaughter's the one that gives us the story. And he goes and he tries to pray in the Holy of Holies, and Jesus doesn't appear. So as he's coming back, Jesus appears in the hallway. And he was just late. That's right. It was.
He's running late. He's running down the hallway.
He had a sandwich. He was just, what do you do? Anyway, so. And he gets the word that he needs to become the president of the church right away. And he goes and tells his granddaughter, you should do that. Well, there's a family story that goes along with this that they don't quote in any of the manuals. Because you can find that whole story in the Ensign, which is the church magazine. You can find it all sorts of places. But the rest of the story is that Jesus tells him there's no longer a presiding high priest on the earth. Because they've given up on polygamy. Because this is the whole time when Wilford Woodruff, the second manifesto, we're not going to do polygamy anymore. Yeah. And until polygamy was restored.
We want to be a state in the union.
All those things. He apparently Jesus couldn't show up. He was barred from his own house, had to show up in the hallway to say, you got to run things, but you got to bring polygamy back. And we all know that happened immediately because,
Jesus couldn't go somewhere like the Son of God
in his own house.
Unless your church has multiple wives per man. He just can't enter through the doors.
See, this is one of the things that I've mentioned previously. I love to get some of my LDS friends or coworkers to argue different points of LDS. Like, they're all LDS, and I like to get them arguing points of LDS doctrine among themselves. Yeah. That's I fucking love that. It's one of my it's one of the highlights of my day anytime I can do it. And yeah, I had coworkers one time arguing over whether or not the Holy Ghost can enter a strip club.
We have a guy on the ex-Mormon subreddit that goes by the name The Holy Spook, and whenever anyone mentions the Holy Ghost, he posts this meme over and over again. It's this British lord with a monocle, and it reads, "The Holy Ghost is like an 18th century aristocrat, saying, 'I'm so offended,' and tottering off at every time something happens." Anyway, he posts that every time. He's just the stalwart. But now I think of that whenever someone says, the Holy Ghost couldn't be there. Yeah. Oh, golly me. And off he goes. So the Wilford Woodruff, let's go a little bit into that. This will be a fun one. I'd love you to bring this up with all of your Mormon friends.
Okay.
And just say, now, I want to know what Wilford Woodruff has to do with the Bohemian Grove. Got that? Now, the Bohemian Grove, if you don't know.
I don't know.
This is a group that gets together. They got together back in the 1800s. They have a whole bunch of artists and performers, and they have a whole bunch of political and rich men.
It's more political nowadays, isn't it considered? Or
a bunch of Bohemians.
They still go get a whole bunch of Bohemians and bring them in, and they do this high jinks and low jinks plays. They burn Karen effigy, and they have a giant owl statue. Yeah. Well, this all started
playing a bunch of grab ass.
And Richard Nixon was invited, and he went, and his quote, you can find this on YouTube, is that it is the faggotiest thing I have ever been to. That was his opinion, and he never went back. Bill Clinton was invited to go to this, and he said, Bill Clinton said, don't insult me. They would never invite me to something like that. So anyway, it's a very... so this was started in 1893, I want to say, and this is just before Wilford Woodruff. No, 1890, and Wilford Woodruff dies in 1893, I think. So anyway, so you talk about Utah becoming a state. Mm-hmm. The individual who helped Utah become a state, that was the big lobbyist, was a member of this Bohemian Society. Oh, okay. And he invited, as part of the thank you for all the contributions the church made, Wilford Woodruff to come and speak on his 80th birthday. So Wilford Woodruff, he's kind of got a bad health system, and they decide that the good air will be good for him, so he rides from Utah to San Francisco, California for good air. Think about that. Different era. And he speaks on Monday, and by Thursday he's dead. So
that's some good air.
But I looked up, I wanted to know this whole care in effigy, was that all going on during, because I'm a believing member, I'm thinking, didn't God tell him these guys are kind of weird? And they were doing that for 3 years before it was going on. But now and it's the only time they ever have an 80-year-old come speak. I was like, is that a normal thing? They had give an octogenarian award away every year. No, only time. He shows up, he gives the speech, and like I said, he's dead a few days later. He was in bad health, as said. I looked way in to see if there was some sort of poisoning. Was it possible? And all the banks that were there, and part of it, were not the banks out east that they were owing money to. I couldn't find any connection. But anyway, kind of a weird thing. He was part of the Bohemian Society that goes out and dances and puts on women's clothing with politicians. There you go. Weird shit.
Well, I've heard that place is very secretive too. Like, even when they're not having their get together, the place is like locked down. You can't get in. Like, I've seen people trying to sneak in and get photos of the giant owl and stuff, and of the grounds. And people have gotten photos, but have also gotten arrested and taken away by trying to get into this place.
This is all completely new to me. I have not heard any of this. If I have, I've wiped it from my memory somehow.
They're one of those like fringe conspiracy theory things who are actually kind of truth, kind of people like, oh, it's the Bilderbergs that are doing this, and Illuminati type thing. It's
skull and bones kind of shit.
Yeah.
It's all connected. It's all, George W. Bush, that was part of the Skull and Bones, and had the first thing we have on George W. Bush, this is not terribly Mormon related, but is a news article of him getting the Skull and Bones tattoo or branded on his bum. That is the first he shows up on any newspaper anywhere. Anyway, he was both at Skull and Bones and was part of the Bohemian Grove, so I guess there's some giant connections, but I don't know. The point is, the Mormon Church was not terribly connected, but Wilford Woodruff was definitely there and spoke.
And wore women's clothes. And was so shocked by what he saw that he died.
One of the faggotiest events I've ever been to.
I am not a crook. Yeah, no, totally. I guess another thing we should mention. I do tours of the Utah Daughters of Pioneers Museum up here by the Capitol building. It is a great building. If anyone has an inkling to go and see some really weird Mormon shit, there are some very awesome things.
How do they feel about you doing those tours?
So they are not correlated. They don't fall under the correlation committee. These are actual families that wanted to preserve the true stories of the pioneers. So that's why they have these weird items. So among the items that I love to point out, there is Brigham Young's bloodstone amulet that he wore for protection. If you ever played D&D, he was right up there with you. He loved to LARP, man. He would put this thing on whenever he was going into a dangerous area, and it's just there that you can see it.
So that's how he got into the strip clubs.
I think he got in the strip clubs because of his manly beard. I really think that was the secret.
But that stone gave him the protection against.
I can attest to the benefits of having a manly beard. It gets you places, man.
That's right. There's the death canes, which is one of my favorite things. So when I was a boy, around the kitchen table, I learned about the death canes, and I wanted to know more.
I have never heard of this.
The death canes?
Death cane, walking sticks. So when Joseph Smith died, They brought him and Hiram back in this oak, what's the word I'm looking for? Wagon.
Box.
Okay.
Wagon. And when they brought him back, they cut up the wagon and they made, oak sticks out of it. And when they made the death mask of Hiram and Joseph, it pulled out some hair. So they took the hair and they braided it and put it in the top of the sticks with a little glass window. So you could see that these were legit Joseph and Hiram braided core, 3-foot Ollivander wands. And these things have magical abilities.
I was going to say, it sounds like something from fucking Harry Potter.
Yeah, it's straight. I mean, anyway, they heal people. You put them under your head and they take away bad dreams at night. And there were 12 of these, and they were given to Emma to give to whoever she thought was most worthy. And Brigham gets one, which tells you they weren't on such bad terms back then. And Joseph Smith's bodyguard got one. And, but they have one on display there where you can go and actually see and it's got the whole description. And I've got a picture of it up on my blog, as well. What are some of the other just truly crazy stuff?
So where are the other 11 then? Do they say? Are they in the church as like the apostles have them to,
they're in the church's
have
vault.
good dreams? Yeah.
So I've tracked down about 5. So there's one that's just labeled there at the Utah Daughter of Pioneers. There's an Emma's walking stick that looks exactly the same as the other one. And my guess is that's probably her death stick.
Okay.
But they don't have it turned where you could see the window or not. Just don't know. There is the Abraham Cannon family. They have one of the sticks, but then they have 2 of them. So they were only given one, and the family, there were 2 sons, and one side of the family claims they have the illegitimate one, and the other side of the family claims they have the legitimate one, but only one of them is real. Someone made a fake one of these, and both sides of the family says, well, ours cures everything, so this must be legitimate. So there you go. There's one in the Church History Museum, so the church does own one. I don't know if they have any more. And then the one the bodyguard has, the family of the bodyguard, that he donated Joseph Smith's saber that he would march up and down the banks of the Missouri River when he was the what's the name? Major General of the Nauvoo Legion. You can see it's a big sword.
It sounds more like playing soldier by the water.
They're into LARPing, man.
There was a lot of, I think they're still into LARPing, to be honest. If you look at Priesthood Session, they're all first level clerics marching in together. But anyway, his family kept the walking stick, but donated the sword. So,
okay.
There's also a picture of the first person paid his tithing to the church.
Wow.
A little black boy by the name of Green Flake when he was 10 years old. There was a woman, she lived out in California and she was having a hard time making ends meet. And so she decided, and this is pretty clever thinking if you think about it, that she could donate her slave and his efforts would be about worth what her tithing was. So she didn't need to pay tithing anymore if she just gave the slave to the church. Well, the church did not have a way to receive a person as property, but they were teaching at the time that slavery was legitimate and ordained of God, so they couldn't refuse him either.
Well, it's all in the Bible, so...
And Brigham was big on this. He cared that slaves were God-inspired property, having some of his own. So, this Flake boy, now I've said he was 10 years old when he was given to the church. That's not right. I got that wrong. He was 10 years old when he was given to the church later on, but he was an older gentleman because he was one of the drivers who drove Brigham Young in on the wagon when he says, "This is the place." The next words he said were "driver, drive on," and they were 2 black slaves. They leave that part out with the ellipses as well. That's but this so he gets donated to the church. They don't really have any way to deal with him, so he just empties waste baskets for a couple of years and kind of putters around, and it's really awkward. Finally, the church just gives him his freedom, and they're like, "What do we do with So he loves the church forever afterwards. He dies a faithful member. His family is still members of the church, and they love that this is still there for their grandfather. But the church would rather just get rid of that little piece. But the woman who donated him wanted to know if he was keeping up his end of the bargain, whether her tithing was paid. So she
donated him? That just sounds so fucking horrible.
I'm just gonna donate him a human.
Yeah, this woman who donated a poor black person to the church, and the church accepted, but wasn't quite sure what to do with him.
Yeah. So she's like, is he still doing a good enough job? And they lie to her. They just openly say, no, he's doing fine. It's all fine
great.
here.
He's dead. He's dead.
So he's off being free, and they just tell her that he's still a slave to keep her happy so they don't have to approach the question. It's just this very awkward all around. So there you go. There's some of the happy random.
The church could have just told the lady, oh, God told us to free him.
Sure. And she would have bought it because
she believes them.
Yeah. But
instead
no.
is like, oh, shoot.
Shuffle feet.
We don't want another one. We still have him. He's still doing good. We don't need a new model. This model is working perfect.
Yeah.
If you have questions, comments, concerns, compliments, corrections, or concepts for content, contact the show via email at godlessrebelution@gmail.com, by text or voicemail at 330-81-REBEL, or Twitter the twatter at TGI Podcast. Thanks, bitches.
Maybe I shouldn't be telling you this, but there is a state where the marriage laws are a little looser. Utah.
Utah? Home of America's most powerful weirdos?
Our lives could be so wonderful there.
In Provo, Utah?
Why would I go to Utah? I love booze, caffeine, and monogamy.
Gosh darn.
So
heck.
you were totally in, went on a LDS mission, started learning more about the church. At what, was there, can you point to one specific thing and say, that was it, that was what broke my faith?
I can't say one specific. There's a couple of events that are pretty key though. So I knew that I was suspicious of the correlation committee and what they were doing with these ellipses, right? For a good long while, I'm still Elders Quorum instructor. I'm still teaching people, but I'm editing heavily the lessons.
And the correlation committee is what exactly?
So there is a committee. Let's do that. Let's go there. Once upon a time ago, there was this guy by the name of Harold B. Lee, and he became prophet later on, but this is the 1920s, and he is a budding, blossoming young LDS man, and he is called into a stake presidency, and there is a bunch of these weirdos who were still practicing polygamy.
Oh.
And his stake is in charge of getting rid of these guys. So he sits on the councils that helps excommunicate person after person after person.
I figured you were going to say execute.
No deaths.
Oh.
That was earlier in church history.
No Hosea Stout anymore. After that, he is made stake president, and it's the Great Depression. It's 1929, and he decides that no one in his stake is going without a Christmas, and he really puts effort in. To his credit, he gets gifts out to everyone. They work 80-hour weeks just on church stuff. It's an amazing story. But he pulls it off, and it comes to the attention of the brethren, and he is made a general authority to implement a welfare system. And that is still the welfare system of the church.
The bishop's storehouse and all of that.
All of that is origined with his head. And while he is there, he comes up with this idea that we should standardize the manuals so we don't have any more of those weird, dangerous polygamists. That is he wants to make sure that the pure, holy, true are not led away by these filthy. Now, what he didn't know is that the people who were excommunicated in his area was Matthew Crawley. He was an apostle, and he was actually given the sealing power to give polygamous marriages, and he believed that he was doing it right. So anyway, that's a whole another story. But he has this ingenious idea to standardize all the manuals. And as he puts together a committee to standardize all these manuals, and then, back in the day, each section of the church made their money by selling magazines. That was the central income, which is why you still have the New Era, the Friend, the Ensign. Every individual unit has it. And that was the primary income for the auxiliaries. And the Relief Society had one as well. Well, he says all of those magazines have to pass through his committee. And then he says the key thing of our committee is priesthood. And the power of the priesthood. And this is where you get the Relief Society organization is eventually absorbed into the church and put under the first presidency. This is how he gets power over each, and he brings it in, and we get the solid block. And anyway, they're this group. the correlation committee, their job is still to make sure that all the manuals are the same. And the way they did this, and you can read more about this if you want to know more in Damon Smith's Book of Mammon. They went into a room and they literally put 72 note cards up on the wall. And they said, this is what Mormonism is. Anything that is not this goes away. And this is why all the church lessons are boring. If you've ever wondered, why is it so mind-numbingly dull? You have 72, and you can't vary from it. So anything like walking death sticks or magic amulets, that's all gone. And polygamy was not one of the 72. So these are what it means to be a Mormon. He redefined it. Well, how is he able to do this, is the obvious question, right? Because there's prophets and apostles above him. Well, he was brought in at such a young age. Everyone in the church knew he was going to be prophet forever because he was made an apostle at, I want to say 45. I don't know if I've got that right, but very young. So he was going to be prophet for like 40 years. Yeah. So everyone knew which side the bread was buttered on, and so they would do whatever he said, and he got a tremendous amount of power. When he's finally made prophet, he actually dies just a year later from a heart attack.
Oh, so disappointing.
They put so much work into him. It's like, we did it all for nothing?
Such disappointment.
Yeah. And we're seeing it again with Bednar. Bednar's very young. Everyone's giving him tons of power. He's able to say just about anything and go anywhere. This is a side note that everyone keep this a secret. Someone passed me who works for the finances of the church a receipt that had Bednar had turned in to get reimbursed, and it was a brothel in Australia. If anyone works for the church, I try not to spread these things, without two sources, but if anyone happened to just take a look at what he's passing in, if you find a second one, I'd love to have two sources.
Or if you're a listener in Australia and you know the brothels, let us know if this guy's been there.
Or not. We could just know about brothels. That'd be fun too. I mean,
well, there's actually an article in a magazine, it was like a Rolling Stone article that was talking about women that work at the brothels in Nevada. And at least 3 times in their conversation, either bishops, LDS young men coming back from their missions, or there's also one guy who was a teacher in the Mormon church who went down there to cross-dress. So they're saying, those women down there are saying, it's quite frequently. Yeah, we're used to having the Mormons come down here for sex.
Ryan, what happens in Vegas is supposed to stay in Vegas.
Well, it was in Rolling Stone.
Do we want to go to cross-dressing Mormons? Is that a good topic for the next bit?
Sure.
You got a story about that too?
Well,
of course.
I feel like we got sidetracked. So we were talking about something, and then I asked what correlation was. But now I can't remember what the other something was that we were talking about initially.
Schools are boring. I'm lost track too. We got on the cross-dressing, and that intrigued me.
I'm like,
sorry.
No, this is you're totally fine, man. We just kind of zig and zag, and now I feel like I've shortchanged you because I lost track of what you were talking. That's all right.
If it comes back, we'll go back there. But cross-dressing is pretty interesting, so let's go
Sure,
there.
hell yeah.
Once upon a time, so Wilford Woodruff, right?
Cross-dressing stories are always good when it starts with once upon a time.
All the best stories start with once upon a time. So, remember Wilford Woodruff, Mr. I went to the Bohemian Grove.
Yeah.
So when he was on the underground, and the underground was when they would hide from federal marshals because of polygamy, and the federal marshals were trying to get them to get on trial because it was illegal, and they were doing a whole bunch of other shifty stuff, and just like they look for an ounce of marijuana in order to get the whole crime syndicate. That's basically why they were out looking for people who were engaging in polygamy. So the apostles go and hide, and there is this story of this woman who makes Wilford Woodruff a Mother Hubbard dress. And he would go around to avoid the federal marshals in this woman's, as frumpy as you can imagine with the little bonnet.
Yeah.
And one day he's out for a walk, and he comes around a fence post, and there's a federal marshal right there. And the guy recognizes that this little old woman with the giant beard.
That's what I was going to say. Did he have a big...
Yeah, I was wondering, did he sacrifice the beard to do this?
No, nothing that level of clever. So he's nabbed, and he actually gets hauled off at that point. So yeah, cross-dressing Mormon.
Yeah, he must have been to the circus and seen a bearded woman and thought, I can do that.
Desperate times, desperate measures, I guess. I don't know.
But also in that Rolling Stone article, the Mormon that was going on there was cross-dressing. The women said he wasn't there for sex. He purely went there to cross-dress and dress as a woman and hang out with them. And that those women that worked that place finally convinced him to leave Mormonism, and now he lives full-time as a transgender. woman.
Oh. So a full not just like a
like
drag queen
he
or
did.
anything.
He that's the way he felt, and he felt the only place he could be himself was in the brothel, where they wouldn't be talking to the bishops that were also there for sex.
That's like the sweetest brothel story I've ever heard. It
really
See,
is.
women at brothels aren't just, sex crazed women that want your money. They got hearts too.
Hookers with hearts of gold.
Good solid.
I'm still wondering what we were talking about before we got off on the correlation thing.
It had to do with what you did for work early on in the church when you were teaching.
That's right. I was elders quorum, and I was teaching, and there was something related.
Well, because I had asked, I had said you were a true believing Mormon, you went on a mission, you come back, and I said that's what it was. So I had asked you if you could point to any one thing in particular.
That's right. Okay, so I was doing that sort of research.
Thanks, Ryan.
You're welcome.
I stumbled on all this stuff that I just said and was like, wow, I think they may be a shifty secret combination within the church, right? Because that's a big Mormon thing, is these secret combinations. Spoiler alert, secret combination in the 1800s meant masonry, which, the whole temple was based on. So whatever, you want to go with that. But, and Mormon Stories with John Dehlin had started up, and I was kind of making my way through that. I found it interesting. It was some great history and the one that really got me was the Mark Hoffman episode, because they talked to people who were in and around and worked with him and bought things and knew the guy who was blown up. And I mean, these were great
bunch of crazy shit that happened in the 80s.
A bunch of crazy shit in the 80s. Yeah, he was a great forger, in case anyone hasn't heard of this guy, who forged not only Mormon documents, but all sorts of 1800 documents, and they still don't know how he managed to make the ink look radiocarbon dated back to the time. So anyway, he had on an archaeologist by the name of Michael Coe. And Michael Coe was someone I knew from my father and all that research, and that his name featured prominently in a lot of the things that were published as the non-Mormon, right? And here he was, he'd gone on all these digs, and he was telling this story about how the apologists were two-faced, that they would do really strict academic guidelines when they were digging and when they were presenting, and then they would come back to Utah and totally make up things that were not at all what were said when they were down actually on the dig. And he made this mention that will forever change my life, and that was that there was no gold in the Mesoamerican area until, except for in the Incan range, and we'll get to that in just a second, until 700 AD. Now, anyone who's counting, that's 300 years after Moroni's dead.
No.
There's no gold. And I'm sitting there going, there's no gold. Well, then there's no gold cenums or ontais for them to use as money or currency or weights and measures if you want to go apologist instead of coins. There's no golden throne for King Noah, that he's sitting up there on his, if you've seen the photos with the leopards and the king of Ben, you can Google it.
Dude, I'll have to show you, remind me before you go that I have these old LPs. It's the Book of Mormon on LP, and it has this book with a bunch of LDS art in it. I'm sure you'd love it. Remind me to show it to you before.
Arnold Freeberg. Yeah. Good stuff. So it just really hit me. So I started to trace how gold moved in Mesoamerica, and it exists in the Incan Empire for a really long time because they were secluded in Peru by giant mountains.
Yeah.
And as soon as it comes out, it spreads like wildfire. You can trace as the people develop the technology. And this was very damning for a testimony. I'm like, well, then there were no gold plates. Because I was kind of investigating the Reorganized Church and the Church of Christ Temple lot. Yeah. Like maybe Strangites, maybe some Bickertonites. Like I was going through the Order, the Kingston group, which is the Order, the All Red group, the FLDS. Like I was looking anywhere because I had a testimony, but I knew something was wrong with the correlation committee. And so that was kind of where I was like, oh, there's no gold plates. Well, then what is it all? And then there's two things that were straws that were really break the camel's back. My grandfather got cancer, and my brother went down and got a recording, before he died of why he left the church. And he played it for me. And I'd never heard the story before, but, he grew up in, Mexico, before it became Arizona, as a member of a polygamous family.
Well, yeah, that's where a lot of the polygamists went, was to either British Columbia or Mexico, right?
That's right. And we can, I don't know. There's so much story there because Anthony.
The LDS Church history is so rich and rife with nonsense.
It is. There's so many things to pull from. So Anthony Ivins, who was the cowboy apostle, they called him, was sent there, and they gave him instructions to continue polygamy, but then to lie about it to the Mexican president. And we have a couple of letters where he's directly told to lie, and then they throw him under the bus shortly after. But
well, that's what friends do.
But my grandfather grew up down there, and he was going to the youth activity. And he gets to the church, and they're talking about what the youth activity is, and there's this African American descended couple who have evaded the banks and bought a house with cash, and the youth activity is to burn the house down.
Oh, that's pretty fucking shitty.
My grandfather runs home, gets his father, and they run as hard as they could to try to prevent this.
Okay.
And you could kind of hear the tremble in his voice that he felt guilty that he had slowed his father down because they don't make it. The house is burning when they get there. And this woman had this clay pot that had silver dollars in it. It was her last possession. She'd run into the burning house and recovered this. They took the pot and they smashed it, and all the silver dollars were warped from the heat, and they gave it to the young men as mementos. And my grandfather still had his.
Oh, jeez.
Whoa.
And I said to my dad, after hearing this, I'm like, Dad, did you know this?
Didn't Grandpa tell you this?
And he said, yeah, I just thought you left that it was another church. And I said, Dad, he left this one. He didn't leave another church. Like, you don't, those Catholics did something terrible. I'm leaving the Mormon church. We thrive on those stories. We love to hear when another religion totally screws up. So I think this was very much a KKK mix.
Yeah.
Down. And I don't blame the whole church for it, but it was definitely screwed up. The last thing that I would say was a real stickler for me. I was actually defending the church online. This is after I was more or less, I'd resigned callings. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And my wife was still taking the kids and going every week and just trying to navigate those whole murky waters.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I was still defending, we're going to do accurate history. People deserve accurate history. And, someone was talking about the experiments at BYU on the LGBT, where they would round up people and threaten them with their academic careers if they didn't,
if they didn't submit to conversion therapy.
Reparation therapy and conversion therapy. And, I had a copy of the dean's request to do the experiment. It was 1976 to 1978. And I was defending, there was a lot of schools that were doing this at this time period. It was a different time. Human experimentation is always ugly. And someone that recognized me, kind of raised his hand and said, hey, they did that to me. And I was like, no, in that way that you do when you're a believer.
No, they didn't really.
No. This ended in 1976. You were in school in 1994. And he said, yes. I think I remember throwing up. I was like, oh, wait, are you serious? And so he took me on a nice little tour where we got to see the room where they strapped him down, and the walls were padded so the students above couldn't hear him screaming while he was puking. And I'm like, so they did the human experimentation for 2 years, and they knew that it didn't work. That's the conclusion on the paper. And then they ran it for almost 20 years, knowing it didn't help anyone.
Wow.
But they got to torture a whole lot of gays.
Yeah, and at that point, it is torture. So don't get me wrong. If I were a member of Costco and I found out that Costco took a small percentage of its members down into a basement and tortured them, I would resign my Costco membership. And that was when I turned in my membership for the church too. I'm like, I'm done. Thank you. I'm out. I can't do it anymore. So I've had a lot of people who have challenged me on this over the years. They're like, no, it didn't happen in 1994. You're making things up. We had a reporter with the Salt Lake Tribune. I think it was with the Salt Lake Tribune, who contacted me. We were able to find evidence in 1981, 1982, and 1986. That's not quite to 1994, but it
shows a trend.
And the fun thing is, in 1981, the people who are talking about it are like, and this is the last year we're ever going to do it. And then in 1982, they're like, this is the last year we're ever going to do it. And then there's a published thing on 1986. It's like, they tell every year, this is the last year we do it. So then the question everyone asks immediately is, do you think they're still doing it? And the answer is, I don't think so. I think Evergreen ended in 2012. And with that, it seems like the church kind of took a big step back. But it could have been happening all through there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're still, I'm fairly certain, pro conversion therapy.
We had a member of the subreddit who posted, now to take this for what it's worth, and we're going to qualify that I have not backed this story up, but it's his own personal story.
It has not been independently verified.
That's right. Where he was in the room when Elder Ballard reached over and said, I wouldn't do this for anyone, but I think there's someone who can help, and he was recommending reparation therapy. And he's like, well, they're still doing it at the top, so take that. I take it for what it's worth.
I know people personally who, graduated from BYU or were members of the LDS Church and had it recommended to them within the last decade. So,
well, I even heard a story from a woman that said she was sealed to a homosexual man when she was 15 years old to try to relieve him of his homosexuality.
He just hadn't been with anybody cute enough.
Well, she was also, I guess, her family was very controlling with that kind of stuff and forcing her into that, being raped and everything.
It goes with the territory. So my mother was proposed to by Arvin Shreve as his fifth wife, and she actually turned evidence against him, and he was excommunicated because
who was Arvin Shreve?
He a wacko. You don't need to know much more than it was. He proposed for a fifth wife, but he
an LDS guy, clearly. Yeah.
LDS guy, he was teaching Sunday school, and my parents always warned me against extracurricular church activities because this had happened to my mom. But she didn't tell me till he died up here in the state pen here at Point of the Mountain. He went to jail for molesting both his sons and daughters. So I was that close to becoming one of these stories if my mom hadn't had the guts to turn him down. Which, if we go back to Joseph Smith, right, there are the women who turned him down, like Nancy Rigdon and Martha Botherton and Sarah Pratt, that he totally slandered in the newspapers of the day. That would have been my mom, and Rachel Evans. That was what my mom did. She stood up to someone who she trusted and felt close to, and said, "No, I'm not going to take part of this," and turned him over to the authorities. And here I am. Maybe I have a little bit of my mom in me too. That's kind of my.
She was a rebel.
That's right.
What, were you offered to be a fifth husband?
Not that way. No.
Okay.
I don't swing that way. It doesn't work.
So if the person believes all that, believes that the Garden of Eden was in Missouri, believes that Native Americans are the lost 10 tribes of Israel, believes that Jesus visited North America, these beliefs are barking mad.
So you no longer identify as a Mormon. Are you still religious at all? Do you swing that way? How does that all work now?
So this is my hesitation. When you invited me to come speak at the atheist thing, because I'm not an atheist, I consider myself a progressive deist. And you know what a deist is, because that was like Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
And, basically atheists of the old day.
Somebody who thinks there may be something out there, or there is something out there, but it doesn't dabble in our everyday lives.
It kicked off the universe, God of Spinoza, right? And Einstein, when he talks about God, this is what. So a progressive deist believes that God may have kicked it all off, but then he's been a dick ever since. That's really think Q from Star Trek The Next Generation.
Father, he went out to get smokes and nobody's seen him since.
Well, even worse than that. Think of a 13-year-old with an Xbox. Or have you ever played The Sims and put them all in the swimming pool and took away the ladder just to laugh at them as they die?
My kids used to love doing that.
Yeah. So if you look,
I didn't even know you could do that.
Oh,
you sick, crazy wackos.
Or you put them all in the house and you take away the doors and set the house on fire.
Whoa!
Exactly.
You have them start cooking something for too long, and it starts a fire. And
I thought running people over on GTA was sick and twisted.
And no. But you've taken away the doors, and they can't get out. And,
any game can turn into this. So you look at Jerusalem, right, where it is this main center, the Wailing Wall, and then you put the Dome of the Rock just a few 100 feet away from, and then you have him fight over. That looks to me like an Xbox kid. He's ha ha ha, show up every 600 years to see how bad he messed up the pot, and he's playing around. And so that's kind of where I stand, is that he could be interacting. He could have literally said, Joseph Smith, there are gold plates, and I swear these come from Native Americans, and shown him gold plates, and yet it was so.
And then walked away and started giggling his ass off.
Exactly. Oh, by the way, you got to marry that guy's wife. So I basically, any claim any religious person gives to me, I will totally accept as legitimate. And I will also say, and that proves he's not a nice person. That's kind of how I follow things. So there you go.
So would you, so as a deist, I've always wondered this about deists. You know, you think that there may be something out there that kicked everything off and got everything started. Would you say that you would, if there is an afterlife and you're taken to heaven, I mean, would you choose to worship that being? How would that work? Like, do you think heaven and hell exist? And
I think mankind's best thing we can do is be better than God. I think that if we can outdo the performance of the 13-year-old with the Xbox controller with each other, because his commands, they keep coming across just terrible. They're just absolutely terrible. So, and judgment, I don't think you have any guarantee whatsoever, right? Because this guy, right, or girl, or thing, or group of scientists, they could be any of them, I'm good with any of them, says things like, I'm omniscient, I'm omnipotent, I can be anywhere, but I'm not going to, and you can fill in any of the atheist things that you usually say, right? And that to me says, dick. And you get up to heaven, he's like, oh, were you down there too? I'm so sorry. We have this bulk special on Subway for eternity. You're going to go into the Subway section. There's no guarantees. Yeah, you have no idea if this guy's telling the truth or not. There's so many, what's the word I'm looking for? Anachronisms and contradictions in any of the holy works. But I just, if it was an Xbox kid, you would go, hey, it's Leet, dude, you should totally do the thing. And that fits for me.
I mean, you get there and like, tricked you. We actually burn you with pokers up here.
That's right. The other place was way better. You should have totally lived like that. Yeah. Valhalla could be so legit at that point, and you'd never.
It's like, we didn't tell you can go down there and snort as much cocaine as you want, and you never die.
And Joseph's down there too, because why not?
Yeah.
Having a great time with all the women.
Joseph Smith or Joseph Stalin?
Both.
Oh, okay.
So what are the two craziest things that you have learned about any of LDS history or anything like that? If you had to narrow it to two, what are those two things?
I think. Well, let's go with recent ones. Can we go recent? Because there's way too many crazy to narrow down.
It's your choice, man. Whatever two you think are the most out there crazy things that you've learned about the LDS Church.
Oh, the two most crazy of all the things. So I came prepared with the two recent. Let's start with recent and see if something jumps out.
All right.
So there was this kid by the name of James. Now I'm going to get his name wrong. Brewster was his last name. And he lived in Kirtland during the whole Kirtland Safety Society. And he gets this crazy idea, and he gets a stone, and he starts looking for buried treasure. Now, this is the time period when Joseph goes up to Salem, Massachusetts, to try to find treasure. And he starts doing this thing, and then when Joseph comes back and the whole Kirtland Safety Society breaks off, he follows David Whitmer. Now, David Whitmer was set apart as the second prophet of the Restoration. Most people don't know that it doesn't go Joseph Smith Brigham Young, but it goes Joseph Smith David Whitmer. And this is confirmed in the notes by Joseph Smith Sr. And so this kid follows him and gets a whole set of revelations when he's about 17 years old. Does this sound familiar at all? He puts together a book of scripture.
Huh.
It sounds vaguely familiar.
There's something, anyway.
This kid didn't sell snake oil stuff or was he ever imprisoned for like...
He wasn't in prison. He's actually got that up, but he does have a stone that he uses to go finding treasure for about a good decade, and then he produces the book of scripture, and they send it off to convince the Nauvoo saints that this is the legitimate prophet. And John Taylor actually writes an anti-Brewster tract. And in this tract, which is just crazy, he's doing all the same things they did to Joseph Smith, talking about how this is a witch stone and how he's, using sorcery and he's a treasure hunter, therefore he's not legitimate, and his scripture is really easy to see through, it's flimsy, there's all sorts of anachronisms, like it's totally, you could just, anyway.
You're checking off all of the problems with Joseph Smith.
Just one after the other, yeah, at the same ages, right? And so in 1851, he lists on the census, the U.S. Census, that his occupation is American prophet. And then he kind of vanishes out of history for a while and goes and becomes a school teacher. He just kind of gives it up when he gets about 21. He's like, you know what? I don't buy it anymore.
Yeah, I'm not digging this. Yeah,
and but that was truly crazy that we actually had. I've always wondered, what if you had another young prophet in the Mormon Church? And the answer is there was one.
Yeah,
and they would totally this is not legitimate. You cannot do what Joseph did. Just totally trash him, and so that was really crazy to see this microcosm spring up within it. And they treat him as just like all the other preachers did to Joseph. Persecution all the way. Anyway, the other one that was really fun is the hollow earth theory. And I think this is my favorite because I was taught it in church when I was a kid.
I did not know the Mormons believed. I've heard of other religions following a hollow earth theory, and I've seen other crazy wacko cults about it. But I did not know the Mormons believed in a hollow earth.
So this becomes
this isn't part of official doctrine anymore.
Oh, come on.
They don't teach this in church. They don't. It's not.
But the church never changes.
Define for me what doctrine is, and maybe we can start because, as they say, it's hard to define church LDS doctrine as to nail Jello to a wall. And Anyway, so this is I was primary age, maybe Blazer B, which is 12-ish. And we had a substitute teacher, so you got to take that into effect. But we were one of the last words correlated. I remember the big to-do with the adults that they were they had to change the manuals, and they couldn't get money by writing the manuals locally anymore. But this had to be in the 80s, due to my age, so we had to be just at the tail end of the correlated side. But he came in and he taught, and he quoted a general authority, that the lost 10 tribes were in the hollow earth. And this truly disturbed me as a kid because I knew they were in outer space. Because Battlestar Galactica was written by Glenn Larson, who was a Mormon, so they have to be in outer space.
True.
So this came up on the subreddit as one of the craziest things ever said. So I actually got to find the source, and the ultimate source is none other than Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith taught that that the ice caps, when they melt in the Doctrine and Covenants at the end of the world, that the lost 10 tribes would come out of the hollow earth and cross on a land bridge and come over. Now, you may be saying, wait, I thought Joseph taught they were in outer space. And you'd be also right. That quote also comes from Joseph Smith. Turns out he taught different things to different people depending on where he was and what was going on and what they wanted to believe.
He just couldn't get his story straight.
He's like, they'll never correlate all of this into one central teaching.
And if they do, they will leave this part out. So he also
there will just be ellipses here.
That's right. He taught that there were two land bridges that stuck out of the earth, kind of like you might picture a water molecule at the north and south poles, and there were two spheres that hung out from the north and south poles, and one of them was Venus, and the other one was, I forget what it was, but the lost 10 tribes were on one, and the city of Enoch was on the Venus one.
Okay.
So, and I again, somewhere on the subreddit, I'd have to dig to find it again, but we provided the original sources and who said that Joseph Smith said it, along with diagrams that he drew out of the earth with the things sticking out.
Wow.
No, really, here's what it looks like. Let me show you.
But, okay, one more crazy. Can we do one more crazy?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, this is my all-time favorite, and I've got it. It's big and prominent on my blog because it was life-changing for me. So, once upon a time ago, there was a map drawn of where Moroni went. Here, there, everywhere. He had to get to the Manti Temple because he set apart the Manti Temple to be dedicated. He has to drop off the gold plates. And this map is it's problematic. It has the Kinderhook plates written on it as one of the things that Moroni dropped off.
Oh,
now, if you don't know the Kinderhook plates, they are copper metal plates that were forgeries that were created to fool Joseph Smith. And depending on which apologist you talk to, he did or did not try to translate them. But he does say in his journal, I translated the Kinderhook plates today. So I kind of believe Joseph over the apologists.
Well, do you really believe he translated these plates?
Okay. Oh, sure. The one time you believe Joseph Smith.
I believe everything they say. I take them at their word. I just think it sounds awful. No, for a long time, the apologists argued that this was a fake map, that it was a fraud. That someone was just trying to make Joseph look bad with the Kinderhook plates on this map. And then we get this source that validates the map and says this is a legitimate map and it's used and taught for another 4 decades as the legitimate course of Moroni. But there's one problem, and down in the corner there's a name, Arizona. And the problem is that Arizona was not a state when Joseph Smith was alive. That area is not named Arizona.
No.
Now, there was a giant find of silver that is contemporary that was called Arizona. So maybe he was talking not about a state, but about a giant pile of silver, which kind of fits Joseph's MO. He liked gold and silver and so forth. But
he was a treasure hunter.
But it unless he had heard of this silver find, which was not exactly in all the newspapers,
this didn't exactly have Google.
Exactly. There's no way to look up what Arizona would be named 30 years in the future because it's made it becomes a thing around 1968. So then this map must be a forgery of someone who believed that Joseph was a prophet, believed the Kinderhook plates, and said that Joseph wrote it in his own hand. And it's gone back and forth, both directions, to prove Mormonism and to disprove. And this is oh no, it's but an anti-Mormon wouldn't have forged this Moroni journey. This is a pro-Mormon who is trying to vindicate Joseph Smith long after
trying
the
to
fact.
shoehorn something in. Right.
So that sort of thing just absolutely fascinates me. I love that sort of thing. So
you mentioned earlier that you have a sister who studied, was it geology or archaeology? Archaeology. And now she's a school teacher. How many brothers and sisters have you got?
I've got, let's see, there's 6 siblings altogether. I've got to do math here. 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And we probably shouldn't go into too much detail because they probably wouldn't appreciate, being outed on here. But at least one of them teaches at a BYU school. How's that?
So, well, I was just wondering how many of your siblings are still believers in the church, that kind of thing. Like, are you the black sheep of the family now? Everybody has disowned you. How are family relations now?
Now, luckily I had a brother who left way before me that took that black sheep role, and I'll always be grateful that he was, willing to, go that route.
You're the black sheep and the sacrificial lamb.
That's right. Scapegoat. So I had a long talk with my sister one night, just after, it wasn't the guy showed me the BYU one, but the grandpa's, audio. And, the next day she took off her garments and was like, I'm done. I'm done. Oh, wow. I'm just done. This is so weird. This is done. And she didn't like the temple anyway. She's like, that's weird.
It's fucking creepy and weird, man.
And then I have 2 brothers who are still very much in it, and we still get into conversations every once in a while, but we try to keep from the Facebook wars with kind of a truce sort of situation where they just spam me with pro-church stuff, and I try not to say anything until it gets to me.
Yeah. It's like, you keep pushing me. You keep pushing me. You probably shouldn't be asking me these questions because I will destroy your faith if you keep pushing me.
I will spam you with blogs.
So I had this nephew that came back from a mission, and this is right when I'm deep into the research phase. Yeah. I'm like, you know what happened with the Adam God theory? And, cause we were taught, that this was just kind of a weird theory that maybe some people kind of believed a little bit, and maybe Brigham, they just misunderstood him. It was a transliteration error by a scribe. There's all these kind of explanations.
And what the Adam God theory is?
That Adam, was not a man, but he was literally God the Father who came down, and when we pray to God, we're praying to Adam, Michael, the first man Adam. Well, it turns out that Brigham Young taught that over 37 years. This was not a little teaching that was, one guy wrote it down wrong.
Or a misinterpretation.
It wasn't a transcription error. It wasn't,
and he taught it in all sorts of places, and one of his wives, Eliza R. Snow, wrote a song about it. Like, it was kind of a big deal. Yeah. It was at the temple. In order to go through the veil, you had to learn that, it was not a tiny thing that was accidentally, and there's a letter, very fascinatingly, between Eugene England, who was a LDS professor at BYU, and, Bruce R. McConkie, where Eugene England says, the Adam God theory, here's the evidence. And Bruce R. McConkie, the apostle, writes back, well, if we admit this, then the fundamentalists have us. So they knew. And so I just brought this up, and this has kind of caused a little bit of a rift in the family because I was corrupting this young man. Now, this young man had just spent 2 years trying to teach people about the church.
And he didn't even know.
And he did. Yeah, no, I'm just like, hey, did you know this stuff? This is awesome. And that didn't go over so well. So I feel kind of bad. And at the same time, I'm kind of like, he was an adult. Yeah, he was an adult. He
can handle information.
One hopes.
He's a big boy. And it's probably better that he hears it from you, a trusted family source, than some Joe random. Yeah.
I instantly became not trusted family source, and I had been beguiled and led away. So you ask about that, and I really only have a couple of qualms with the church. It's okay, you can worship whatever you want. I'm not. It's not a big deal. There are two things that bother me though, and they still bother me a lot. One is whenever the legitimate general authorities, the 70 and the top prophet and the quorum of the 12, when they say people who leave are beguiled by Satan, misled, darkened is a word they like to use, tools of the adversary.
Like the black people.
God totally changed his mind in 1978.
Yeah, they can no longer drive around in the carriages or drive the carriages for the prophets.
Or be given as personal property to the church. It's changed. Right. Yeah. So any of that sort of speech, I will post on Facebook at that point. They've done it again. If you're truly my friend and you're still a member, could you just write to a general authority and say, this hurts people I know and care about?
Yeah.
And every time that I do that, there is someone who says, you've just misunderstood it. You just didn't hear it right.
No, it's pretty clear what they're saying.
I kind of want to say you don't get to make that determination. If I feel hurt, you don't get to say like, if someone hits you in the face and they're like, ow, that hurt. You don't get to say, that didn't hurt you. That's not an okay.
You've interpreted my striking you as something other than what I did.
Yeah, exactly. No, this is pretty clear. Tool of the adversaries, not mincing words very much. Darkened, we're not.
Yeah.
So, that bothers me and when they teach that you have to give so much and everything and it's never good enough, I think we deal on the subreddit. So let's talk about the subreddit for a bit after.
Sure.
We deal with people who struggle with that all the time and who are falling and broken and losing family and friendships and they gave, hundreds of thousands of dollars and all of their time and it breaks people. That bothers me too. I think they need to tone down.
It's that unachievable goal that they're giving to you and saying, well, if you do this and this and this, you can achieve that goal, then you don't get it. So you got to give more and you don't get it. So eventually you're completely depressed.
And it's the view that you're either with us or you're against us. There is no middle ground with the LDS Church. It's that you're all in or you're a pawn of Satan.
And there's even a quote by Joseph Smith that you leave neutral ground forever once you hear about the church. Mm-hmm. You're one side of it. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And it does hurt especially when it's some, young women's teacher teaching my daughters that I, their father, am the evil influence, and she's misquoting the prophet because it's got ellipses in that stupid manual. That drives me bonkers. I'm like, can we just sit down and you not lie to my children? I just want to go through the lie that you just told. Let's talk about what he really said. Anyway, what was I going to say we were going to get back to?
Well, I just had one question for you real quick.
You said we were going to get back to the subreddit.
The subreddit, yeah.
Yeah, but so you're getting all this information from, you said, mostly Mormon sources.
Yeah.
Are these actual, transcripts of this, or do they have, the actual visual, seeing the letters and actually getting to see the actual handwritten stuff that's been not been manipulated at all?
Like the one I was talking about, the Adam God theory.
Yeah.
They actually have it at BYU in the special collections. You can go and see the handwritten documents. Joseph Smith Papers was a thing, but it hadn't been posted online yet. My father had bought the books, so I was seeing it in the official
the original text.
Yeah, published. This is a great one for crazy. I'm sorry, this is the craziest. There's so many good ones.
I know I said the other one was, but this one is the craziest.
So, Joseph Smith actually gives us a piece of the Adamic tongue in the Joseph Smith Papers, and you can Google this. They just like going through the what's it called? Book of Breathings, facsimile of the Book of Abraham, or going through and translating the Book of Mormon. He translates a little bit of the pure Adamic tongue, and he includes the word for angles, which is Aman Engelsmann. That is the short, compressed, ultimate speech of mankind. But you can find that in the Joseph Smith Papers. They've got that online. I didn't make that up. This is not
it sounds
me.
like he's a Rastafarian.
It totally, like the true name of God is Aman, and the true name of an angel is Aman Engelsmann, and it just, it's so Calvin and Hobbes making stuff up in the backyard, it hurts. Okay, so, the subreddit. So we had a big sit down when I was moderator the first time around, where we were saying, what is the purpose of this subreddit really? Cause there's people who post like Boyd K. Packer's head on Smeagol. There's people who post giant historical whatevers, which is my kind of shtick. There are people who post, current financial records. We had a big bunch of leaks that came through the subreddit recently. And what are we really here to do? And we came up with, it's mainly a recovery subreddit. It's whatever people need to do to like cope and deal with this post-traumatic post-religious distress disorder, whatever it is that people go through.
Their religious anger.
Yeah. And to get through that period. And you know, there's a saying in the church that you can leave the church, but you can never leave it alone.
Leave the church alone, yeah.
Yeah. I can bear solemn testimony that I know lots of people who have started leaving it alone. They come in and they're angry and they're just throwing stuff and they're talking about how, you know, I gave up the love of my life, this man that I desperately wanted to be with, but we were both gay and we confessed to the bishop and now, and all these things that they struggle with, and I've seen them go through that whole like remorse and that the 5 phases of
the cycle of the like mourning or whatever. Yeah.
And then they say goodbye. And if you look up under me, the words happy trails, I've said happy trails to each person who's gone away. And we are at thousands of people who have wandered away and left it alone. They've come to a resolution where they don't need it anymore. I think that's really our purpose, is if you're at that phase where you're just so angry and so lost and you're getting prodded by some aunt that won't leave you alone every week on Facebook or whatever, and you just want to scream, this is the place you can go and scream, and no one's going to judge, and you know, and you'll find out really cool, weird, wacky stuff like I've talked about, as well as how people are doing day to day, and we've had some great friendships come out of it. But it's mainly, and we have 2 main subreddit rules, and there's really only 2. There's a few others that kind of help things go smooth, but the 2 big ones are no personal attacks. You have to attack the argument, not the man. And it's amazing how hard that is.
I've moderated Facebook groups. So
you know, it's constant. And the other one is you do not get to out anyone. You cannot respond with, "Oh, I hate you so much, I am revealing your personal identity online." And those are the big 2. And yet it's still hard because everyone who shows up wants to keep it secret enough that they can get out the frustration, and they don't want to be attacked for what they have personally suffered.
Yeah.
And so that's what the subreddit ex-Mormon is about. It's not about all the things the church would tell you it's about. We're not, what are the standard ones? We're not lazy.
Looking to sin.
Although if you're looking to sin, there is an Exmo Drinks, that has all sorts of good drink recommendations. I highly recommend the Blood Atonement. That's a great one. Anyway, and there's an Exmo Not Safe for Work, where there's another type of sinning. We'll leave that over there. But this is a place that's mainly about venting and getting through that process, that there is. And then there's also karma, which we should explain for anyone who goes onto Reddit and is like, what the crap are the up and down arrows? If your thing is voted up, you get fake internet points called karma. They do nothing. You can't use them at all.
No Bitcoin value?
No Bitcoin value. You can't trade your account to someone else for anything. However, once you get to 100,000, there is a 100,000 club that you get into, in which there's a bunch of people who spam cats constantly. And there is a 1% club of the top 1% of Reddit. I am unfortunately in both, and they also spam cats constantly. So those are your pinnacle of Reddit level.
I don't know how Reddit works, and a few years ago I made a flying spaghetti monster light display.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I posted that, and somebody said, well, you should post that in Reddit. So I went and made an account, and I posted it. And the next day, my kids told me that I was on, and I posted it in Our Atheism, of course.
Right, yeah.
And my kids told me the next day that I was on the front page of Reddit, not just the R atheism, but like the
big one,
the main page, and I was like, is it a good thing? Did I do something bad, or am
I in trouble?
It's something like several million people seen it at that point. That's kind of the equivalent. And if you could get click traffic, that would be, thousands of dollars. But no, you don't get any. There's no value. Why do we post things? I don't know why we do, but we do. And it's great when someone votes your stuff up. It feels spiffy. There you go.
Well, and going back to your point, you said that, one of the mantras of the church, or anybody who's still in the church who is complaining about people who have left or non-believers, is that, you can leave the church, but you can't leave the church alone. And my stock or standard response to that is, I will leave the church alone when the church leaves me alone, when the church leaves other people alone, when the church allows other people to live their own lives without meddling and constant interference through our liquor laws, our laws in general, our laws in Utah in general and throughout the world, where they stop trying to push the church's influence in our political system. If you want to believe whatever you want at home or in your church or your temples, fine, fuck it, I don't care. Just do that, go and be happy if it makes you feel good, whatever, but leave everybody else the fuck alone. And if you can't do that, then I'm not going to leave you alone until you do.
Yeah, I saw a Mormon post the other day on a political Facebook group where they were complaining that the Mormon church is being harassed because they're not allowed to send missionaries to certain countries.
It's persecution. Clear and simple.
That's our religious freedom. How dare they? They shouldn't be allowed to. I'm like, no, you shouldn't be allowed to go to any fucking country.
This is a harsher group that I'm used to dealing with.
Well, and what about the countries where the LDS Church has just decided that they're not going to participate anymore?
Yeah, I think it was Russia that they're talking about. Russia trying to limit the amount of missionaries, or not allowing missionaries in there. If they do come, they have to stick to certain strict standards of what they're allowed to do. And they're like, that's against our religious freedom. Like, we're in Russia.
It was a great, wonderful thing when we got to build the BYU Jerusalem Center, and we weren't allowed to preach there. Which, very fascinating. The Mossad actually watched the people who were in the BYU Jerusalem Center to make sure they weren't teaching anyone for a good 40 years. And finally, they're like, yeah, no, the Mormons are boring. It's fine.
Mormonism, it seems to me, objectively, is just a little bit more idiotic than Christianity is. It has to be. It is Christianity plus some very stupid ideas. For instance, the Mormons think that Jesus is going to return to earth and administer his 1,000 years of peace at least part of the time from the state of Missouri. Now, why does this make Mormonism objectively less likely to be true than Christianity? Because whatever probability you assign to Jesus' coming back, you have to assign a lesser probability to his coming back and keeping a summer home in Jackson County, Missouri. The world should know about it, and it is almost guaranteed to be embarrassing even to most people who believe in a biblical God.
So taking the opposite stance for a moment, is there anything that you have learned about any of the church history that gives you pause, where you're like, well, that's really interesting. I wonder if there's any magical claim that you're like, wow, I haven't been able to debunk that or find out anything that would speak that wasn't the whole truth or anything like that?
So we have some days on the subreddit, or at least we used to. I don't know that we've done them anytime recently, where we would put reasons to doubt. Mm-hmm. And so one of them that I put on there was a story about a magic handkerchief.
Is this reasons to doubt your doubt, or to doubt in general?
Reasons to doubt your doubts. Reasons to still believe. So there's the story where they all get malaria as they are in the swamp that would become Nauvoo. No, is Scarlet Fever? Scarlet Fever?
Scarlet Fever was...
No, it's one of those old-timey diseases. And I'm going to say one of the sexual ones, and then everyone's going to laugh. What is the name of the thing?
Chlamydia?
Not chlamydia. Cholera. Cholera.
Okay,
that was close. Yeah. They all were dying of cholera. So they all get sick, and Joseph Smith goes around and he blesses a couple of people, but then he can't bless all of them, presumably because he's sick. the logic there just escapes me. But he blesses a handkerchief, and they take the handkerchief around to people and they heal. This was a real sticking point for me because people clearly got up and walked. But then we did the numbers, and 14 people die after the blessing. If they had just had the average rate, it would have been 7. So they probably spread the disease via the handkerchief and killed about twice as many people. It was not statistically significant. It could just be that they died of that normally. They were in a swamp. That probably contributed. Yeah. But that was one that...
It's kind of like our old hospitals. We're going to put everybody who's sick in this open bayed room.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And they're all going to get better. Oh, they're all fucking dying.
Yeah. Weird how that works.
Germ theory, it mattered.
It's like the demons are spreading in this wide open area. I don't understand.
It's one thing Mother Teresa never learned about.
Oh.
Suffering was good.
Be rotting. She is, but...
No, she's in heaven with the hot pokers.
Yes.
We covered that earlier. Actually, I think that Mormon heaven might be the actual, like, you get there and do nothing but sing 72 topics for the rest of eternity. Yeah. What are some of the others where people have come in? But we sit down and we talk about, what is the source? How could we validate this? And I have this thing that I do that you guys will probably appreciate. I got it from James Randi. So, when I was leaving the church, I wanted to come up with a couple of methods to know if I was screwing up my life, that I could hold on to. So one of the things I did is I downloaded an app, and every time I had a spiritual experience, I would record it on my app, right?
Okay.
And that way I could track if my spirituality dipped after I left the church. Did I become darkened? And it turns out that it spiked because there were all these things that I would consider spiritual.
So many more things that I never knew about and couldn't explore. And
well, the church would say, you don't have, purview over that. It's not your responsibility. Mm-hmm. And here it was, and it was,
Oh, you had freedom.
Spoiler alert, it was my own mind, where I was, but I would, my subconscious was trying to tell me, hey, there's something here. You should pay attention. And I eventually tested this with things that I wouldn't know, and it had to come from an outside source. Mm-hmm. And we'll get to that in a second. But I was culling these for the church to fit within their box. And I thought that was really interesting. So I did that. The other thing I did was I set up a code. I got my friend, and this is called the Mithrin Challenge online. It's actually got a thing. But so he has half the code, and I have the other half. And I will do anything that anyone tells me if they can produce both codes. Now, this should be simple for a God of infinite power and able to, all-knowing. I will follow whatever is said between the two, but you have to produce both the beginning and the ending code. And
is it chocolate milk?
No. People immediately say that's not how God works. But in the Mormon sphere,
you're testing God.
There is D&C 139, and in 129, it talks about how to know a true angel from a fake angel. Now, a true angel, you extend your hand and he will shake it, because he's a resurrected being. And if it's a spirit that doesn't have a body yet, he'll put his hands behind his back. But a devil will try to deceive you by grabbing the hand and it will pass through, and that's how you can know a real angel. Well, this handshake method of knowing reality it's an 1800s handshake. The one that I'm describing with the two codes, that's how TCP/IP works. And we call it today a handshake.
Right.
Yeah.
Every YouTube video, listening to this podcast, you are engaged in this type of handshake. Yeah. So the servers know the real message from a fake one. All I'm looking for, and then they say, you're testing God. And I say, no, I want clarity. I just want a clear message. Why is God so afraid of one clear message?
Yeah.
It seems simple.
He used to do it all the time in Old Testament, even New Testament days. He did that shit all the time, right?
Even with Joseph Smith in the early days, he would always begin with, thus saith the Lord, and end with amen. Now, that's not a very complex code, but you at least knew, was he speaking as a man or was he speaking as God? There was a clear delineation. And now, when you brought up the doctrine earlier, I have no clue what doctrine is. They had a speaker at General Conference, which is when all the Mormons get together and talk about things, and the leaders give their instruction. One of them gave an instruction on when you could know doctrine. And he said, when at least half of the brethren, so let's say 7 out of 15,
Okay.
give the same message. That's doctrine. The problem is that 7 out of 15 of them didn't give up and give the same message. So that message is not doctrine.
Yeah.
And you get this, there's thousands of these little loops within Mormonism. So I don't know what doctrine is. What was I going to go on about that before? Was
James Randi, how you...
Okay, so I've had 12 people approach me with codes saying your dad has a message for you from the other side, or because he died, God has revealed your password to me, and not one of them has gotten it right. Not even close. In fact, most people who come up and tell me I have a message from God for you to turn you around from your wicked ways don't even know there's a code. God forgot to mention it. And it's so frustrating. It's so simple. Just now, the way where I got from James Randi, this is how he would test psychics. He would same method. But I realized it was just TCP/IP connections. And if God can't update to our era, I don't know that he's just the Xbox kid.
Technically, God created it.
Well, in theory, I don't know. Maybe we've outpaced him in intelligence. That's within the realm of conceivableness for me, is that
Well, if we go with evolution, and God put us here in his image, we're Neanderthals. He's a Neanderthal. And that's why he's beating on stuff all the time.
As legit as anything else. I mean, there is a revelation to the temple president of the Logan Temple where he sees the devil and his hordes come riding up on horses. Think about that for a minute. They still used horses in the 1800s, and the devil still used horses. The devil doesn't have technology better than we have. Does he get atom bombs when we invent atom bombs?
Does he even need a horse? That fucker should be able to fly.
One would think that you don't have to use horses if you're a spirit, but no. They ride up on horses. They have clothing of their era. They use swords most of the times in these things.
Well, the Bible is the same way. I mean, you hear about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Yeah. You don't hear about the 4 motorcyclists of the apocalypse.
Exactly.
Or the 4
motorhomes.
Or
the Mustang and the Shelby.
The 4 Segway riders of the apocalypse, right?
Right.
None of that.
We could outrun them.
None of the 4 hoverboard riders of the apocalypse. Nothing.
Starships? I mean, you think they would be above us, but no, for some reason they always have technology equal to ours. Yeah, except for we have to give him, because Dan Peterson, he's one of these fair guys.
Oh, that guy fucking bothers me so much.
He pointed out that the stone was just like an iPhone, so I guess they were advanced there. So
Daniel Peterson is the worst.
I guarantee that stone didn't have Siri on it.
That guy is so intellectually fucking dishonest that it kills me. I don't understand how he can walk around and feel like he's an actual human being with as much equivocation and lying and cognitive dissonance that has to be rolling around in that man's fat head.
Let's attack the argument, not the man. His arguments are stupid too.
So going back to the people who you say have approached you and said, I've got a message from God and blah, blah, blah. How do they respond when you say, I mean, when you instantly shoot that down and say, no, you're absolutely wrong?
I walk through those are their answers. First, I don't think God works that way. Oh, well, here it is in scripture. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, I have the code. Here it is. Just like, what was it? Chocolate milk? Milkshake over here?
Yeah.
Some, and then they're like, God revealed to me you don't really have a code. You were just doing this to trick me, and you are beguiled by Satan. And they walk off, and I'm like, really? Really? Because I can show it. I have it written down.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that's the typical pattern. So,
and how do you? What is your view of those people afterward? I mean, do you view them as victims? Do you think they're entirely delusional? Are they just rotten? I mean, how do you feel about those people individually when they come at you with those kinds of things?
I need to be careful. Most of them are family.
They won't listen to this.
Yeah, I doubt any of them are going to be listening to the show.
Probably true. I think that they, and this is going to go for the wider question of what do I think about Mormons in general. I think they're really earnest. They try so hard.
Most of my family's LDS, and they're great fucking people for the most part.
You look at Provo on a Sunday, and that place is dead. They are trying so hard to do everything that they are told. When it comes to leaders, that's a whole different question. But I think that they're just genuinely trying to help. They really want my best well-being, and they're just misdirected on how to do it. So my anger is all directed towards people who take dollars by misdirecting people and lying. Like Tapir Dan, as you were saying, Dan.
Yeah.
He got a lot of money, although he'll say it wasn't a lot of money. But
well, yeah, because they're not horses. They're it's the 4 tapir riders of the apocalypse.
Yes, we actually have the true sign of the tapir that on Reddit that you make. I forget how to do it, but it's got a little snouty thing, and you back and forth. Anyway, so people like that, and it's why I never joined FAIR. I actually submitted and sent some corrections, and they never got back to me. I went to Mormon Think, which was a big website back then, and I submitted corrections, and they were changed in the same day. And I was sending pro LDS, like, you've got this wrong, here's my sources, and they could change it within 24 hours. FAIR never changed it.
And isn't that interesting? Everybody views Mormon Think as an anti-LDS resource, and it's pretty telling that you, as a believing Mormon, would send them something and cite your sources, and they would change it the same day.
Yeah,
but you can send something to FAIR and provide your sources, and you hear nothing.
Nothing. Fun story about FAIR. There's a guy by the name of John Sorensen. He's a lot of the early contributions are his. He's really big. You'll find if you Google him, tons. And he wrote a word print study. I should have said this back in the things that led me out. He did a word print study where they did statistics on words in the Book of Mormon and came up that it had multiple authors. And I was at BYU when this was being done in the statistics department. So I got to run some of the numbers. And I was, I mean, here was confirmation. Multiple authors. It couldn't be Joseph, right? I was so stoked. And when I was doing my research, I ran across Craig Criddle, and he did a word print analysis as well, where he came up with that Spalding was the most likely author. Now, this has been revised since, and if you don't know the Spalding-Rigdon theory, we won't get into it. It's not a big deal. But I wrote a letter
where Joseph basically took Rigdon's work and claimed it as his own.
Yeah.
Okay.
And on my website, I've got a Spalding-Rigdon timeline where I go through Sidney's journal and show the big missing points where he's next to where Joseph is, and all the eyewitnesses. Turns out there's 21 eyewitnesses that say that Rigdon was working on Spalding's work, or that they saw Joseph and Rigdon together, or whatever, which is way more than the 11 witnesses for the Book of Mormon. I'm just going to point that out. But I don't know that we should go into the theory too much, but if you want to go look at it, you can. What was I saying? Darn it. So I wrote a letter to Craig Criddle, and I said, I really am fascinated with your work. I do statistics. This is my day job. I'd love you did you consider da-da-da-da-da-da? And he wrote back, and we had this long conversation back and forth about different possibilities and who Samuel Lawrence was and how he knew about Nephite interpreters when no one else did. And there's all these little cool facts of bits. And it was a great conversation. So I also went to FAIR, and I looked at the paper. John Sorensen was dead by this point, so I couldn't write him. But he did have 2 non-Mormons who had verified his work. I was like, well, we got to get both sides, right? That's the legitimate way to do this. So I called them up. I actually found their names and numbers online. I stalked them. I'm so sorry. And one of them was the secretary who typed it. She had no idea what was in the paper. She just did corrections.
Yeah.
And the other one said that she was I've got to pull up the email to remember exactly. But anyway, she was not connected to it at all. She's like, I have nothing to do with that. I don't know why he put me on the paper. And I'm like, this is the level that gets published on one side.
Yeah.
Versus they had the statistics. They talked about the flaws in the paper. It passed peer review, and they were applying. The reason they were doing this was not to disprove the Book of Mormon. They were doing this to find out who the authors of the Federalist Papers were. And this was their test case. They just kind of threw it in there to see what would come out and whether the numbers even made sense. And it came out like, Spalding, that's interesting. And then they went to go do their other thing. And this has turned into a fight back and forth. They've published another couple of times back on it. And the FAIR guys are like, oh, there's all these problems with it. Well, we have this group that I'm part of called Word Tree, where it's a big data set, and they take thousands of works done in the 1800s, and they ran an analysis of the Book of Mormon against all of them. And Spalding doesn't turn out, after you put the whole work against the whole work, it doesn't match terribly highly. Okay. But there are 2 that do. One of them is called the First Book of Napoleon. And really weird, it was written by a 14-year-old, and it was written long before Joseph Smith, and it was written in like 60 days, and it sounds an awful lot like the Book of Mormon story. But it was written,
is it about Napoleon?
It is about Napoleon and is all in scriptural language, and it has words like stripling warriors and the way we did it, because there was a complaint on I'm sorry, Dwayne. The way Dwayne did it, that I have been added after the fact and I simply know about. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to take credit for anyone. So the way that they did it was they looked at engrams, which is word couplets, to see matches. And you can go into Google and type in, there's a trends and an engrams function on Google, and look at phrases that are unusual. And something like curious workmanship. You don't see that in a lot of books today. That would stand out. If someone said that, you'd be like, that person's probably a Mormon who authored that, right? Turns out curious workmanship is really common in the 1800s. Okay. Everyone's using it everywhere, and it means assembled on location without hands, or without tools. So it actually has a definition when Joseph Smith's using it, and it was a Masonic term. Very fascinating to find that in the middle of the Book of Mormon. Kind of says that it was an 1800s work. Right? Yeah. So you get that sort of groups of 4 words that are really unusual. Things like, I'm trying to come up with stripling warriors is the easy one, because 2,000 stripling warriors, there are 2,000 stripling warriors in, I forget if it's the Late War or the First Book of Napoleon. I think it's the Late War. And that's the other book that... And
I was going to say, I think I've heard of the Late War as being another one that is comparable to the Book of Mormon, and that Joseph Smith may have lifted a lot of the terminology from.
And it was a common school text. It was easy for him to get a hold of. And here you have... not quite to statistical significance where we would like nail it down and be like, we know that this is the source. But boy, does it stand out.
Well, is there any talk, does he ever talk about in any of his writings about liking Napoleon or about reading Napoleon, or?
Neither of those. He talks about a lot of books, but neither of these show up in his thing. Emanuel Swedenborg had a whole book about the mystical. He actually talks about how great Emanuel Swedenborg is. So we do get some of that with him, but neither of these books, these were completely unknown, never talked about in Mormon history until they ran this.
They show up.
And it jumps out in the data. You're like, wow, that's really high quotes. And to do a comparison, when I say it's not statistically significant, right? Imagine, what's a good phrase? Oh, I did a little spiel the other day when Ivanka Trump gave Michelle Obama's speech. And I just took...
Oh, Melania, yeah.
Melania Trump, thank you. When Melania Trump took Michelle Obama's speech, and I just took the Fair Mormon page against the Word Tree guys and the First Book of Napoleon and the Late War, and replaced it with Michelle Obama, and I didn't change anything else, but Michelle Obama, what was her name again? Melania Trump, with those two sources, and just published it, and it's up on the wordtree.org blog now. But it turns out really funny because we can't tell because there aren't enough phrases that are similar. Look, there's only, and then I have like this long thing, and it's the same length as sorry, I moved away from the mic. Getting excited and animated here. But the things are all the same length from the speeches as they were in the Book of Mormon, matching, these two sources. So if you can look at Mrs. Trump's speech and Michelle Obama's and say, I think someone lifted something here. This is way more significant than that. I mean, there's way more phrases that match in more places with the same concepts. So it's, and yet they will totally say, no, it's not significant. And like, well, I think it's pretty transparent.
It's more than a coincidence.
If you had to bet, if someone held a gun to your head, I would put my money on here way before I would put it on there were actual gold plates written in a Reformed Egyptian that were carried for 1,000 years and didn't warp, twist, or bend, that weighed 60 pounds with gold on the bottom that didn't crumple and lose what was being written on it. That just seems unlikely.
Yeah, and gold, it's a very strong, sturdy no, it's not.
No, not at all.
It's a very malleable.
So my last question for you would be, if you wanted to point to one thing, one teaching, one particular bit of history, anything like that within the LDS Church to say the church is false and here is why, what would you point to?
One? Jeez.
The biggest one, the one that stands out the most, the one that is just so blatantly obvious that everybody and their dog should look at it and go, oh wow, I can't believe that I would buy into all the rest of this bullshit.
Wow, that is really tough to be. So I do a series, and it's going to come out as a book called The ABCs of Science and Mormonism.
Oh.
And it's all science and all history. We don't go into any anti-Mormon treatises. We don't go into any, we just take what is claimed in the book and apply science. And my personal favorite, I don't know that it's the strongest, but it's my personal favorite, is the brass plates. We talked about this a little before we got started.
Yeah.
So I think of all the reasons you would write on gold, and brass is the opposite of all of those. It's not malleable. It's hard to write on.
Mm-hmm.
No one writes on brass plates until after Jesus is dead.
I believe it's lighter than gold also, right? As far as weight.
It's about half the
volume,
weight
right.
of gold. Josephus talks about writing into brass with a diamond stylus, and that was a newfangled thing then. That's kind of our first moment where someone would write on brass. And these brass plates are supposed to contain the 5 books of Moses. Now, there's all sorts of problems with that, because the 5 books of Moses were not books. Books were not created. They were all scrolls up until hundreds of years after Nephi leaves. If you take, they weren't assembled into a Torah. They weren't the 5 books of Moses yet. They were individual scrolls at this period. So you have an anachronism in that it's a book. You have an anachronism in what is in the book. Then you have the weight of the thing. Yeah. And, it had to be, so you just take the scriptures, right? All the way up to Jeremiah, which is what it says. And that would be about 1,060-ish pages. And you make that out of brass. And even in English, we are talking a significant weight. But then you have to put it not in Hebrew, which would be even bulkier, but it actually says they were written in Egyptian. So you've got to go to, not Coptic, the one starts with a D. It's the Egyptian of the period anyway. And it's this really long written script. And you end up with this giant tome of brass. Now, even today, if we were to take jewelry grade glass and we were to etch it with the acid method that didn't exist until about 100 BC with the first mention, right? That's 500 years off. That's like Christopher Columbus rocking out to Katy Perry on his iPod Shuffle as far as anachronisms go. And he could roar like a tiger when he got here, I guess. But you've got all of these anachronisms, all of these problems, but then Nephi picks this thing up. And doing the weight as jewelry grade, it ends up, just for the 5 books of Moses, it's roughly the size of a vending machine, about 500 pounds. And if you take it to the whole thing, which is Lehi's genealogy and Zenos and Zenock, the prophets that no one knows or has heard of anywhere else that are in this, and you take it all the way to Jeremiah, which it specifically states they had the prophets all the way up to Jeremiah, this thing weighs as much as a Volkswagen. I just want you to picture in the text, for those of you who did not have the pleasure of growing up LDS, he puts on clothing, he cuts off the head of the local governor, puts on that guy's clothing without anyone noticing the blood, asks to borrow this record that would be the ultimately, Indiana Jones would kill for this artifact. It would rewrite everything we know about history, bookmaking, the assembly of the records and writing on this metal because brass wasn't a thing then, it was bronze. And there's a whole discussion about that as well, and then he takes this and he meets his brothers outside the wall carrying it. He'd have to a Volkswagen on his back. And then the servant realizes that this is not the leader in the clothing, but this is some young kid. A whole question about that as well. Maybe he did impersonations of him when he was younger.
He had a good beard.
He had a good beard. Yeah.
I told you, it'll take you places, man.
In none of the LDS drawings, they never give Nephi a beard. Not once. Anyway.
Bad beard.
So he drops this record, this ultimately precious object. It's like dropping the Hope Diamond that weighs the size of a Volkswagen and leaps on the servant, grabs him, and then they haul this thing for 3 days out in the wilderness and then proceed to carry it with them 8 years in the wilderness, then put it on a boat. This boat has to carry a Volkswagen to the New World. It becomes just ridiculous. It is such a huge and obvious, and it's right at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. It's within the first 5 chapters, first maybe 20 pages, and you have this glaring anachronism that it seems like everyone missed, but I just sat there scratching my head going, could this even exist? And I have to say at that point, I think we have a pretty good solid case. No, someone made something up here.
Well, with God, you can do anything. That includes taking a Volkswagen onto your back for 8 years and carrying it across the ocean.
Because he's a dick. Because he'd make you do that.
He would.
Well, one of the things that does it for me, or that did it for me, that I still think is brilliant, and it's probably because it's something that I noticed early on, even when I was in church. You know, I always wondered why when people pray, they use thee and thine and thou and all of these old-timey words as if Jesus or God would not understand modern language, right? But one of the arguments that I thought was brilliant that Richard Dawkins actually pointed out was that you have a 19th century prophet who is supposedly translating these ancient texts, and instead of doing what interpreters or translators normally do, which is translating into the language of their time, the language that they speak every day, you have a 19th century prophet, seer, and revelator translating, quote unquote, into 17th century English, which is just, that makes absolutely no sense to me at all. Why the hell would somebody who is translating something translate into a language form that is 200 years old?
For those of you at home who don't know what an 1800s person sounded like, go watch Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Anything she did, that's how they talked. Mr. Darcy did not say, "What ho, dear Elizabeth? Behold, my horse hath thrown a shoe."
And like I say, that's one of the arguments that I hear that I'm like, holy shit, why didn't I think of that? Especially in light of me having these questions for so long about, why do I have to say thee and thine and thou? And that's dumb. I don't understand that. But when I heard Richard Dawkins say that, I was like, oh, right, that is bullshit.
Fair enough.
That in the 19th century, a man called Joseph Smith dug up some golden tablets, which he translated and then conveniently lost, and translated, moreover, although a 19th century man translated them into 17th century English.
What is the probability that Yahweh is the one true God in Amun-Ra, Aphrodite, Apollo, Baal, Brahman, Ganesha, Isis, Mithras, Osiris, Shiva, Thor, Vishnu, Wanton, Zeus, and the other 986 gods are all false gods? You guys are atheists just like me, of all the gods I just rattled off. Some of us just go one god further.
If you have questions, comments, concerns, compliments, corrections, or concepts for content, contact the show via email at godlessrebelution@gmail.com, by text or voicemail at 330-81-REBEL, or Twitter the twatter at TGR Podcast. Thanks, bitches.
Let's go with, if I can, one more that is a modern to show that, because the next thing people say is, well, I don't really care about history. It's a good religion. I had a coworker who said this just a little while ago, and I really wanted to chump it, but I let it go because we'd had a really good conversation about history. And I care more about history. But so this is recent. It's 2008, right? What happened in 2008? Everybody, person in the back of the classroom, that's right. We had the crisis with the credit default swaps, and the banks all fell. Mm-hmm. What you did, and we bailed them out. And you remember how mad you were? Do you remember how mad you were when they bailed out those banks? Well, it turns out the church bailed out too. There's a little company by the name of Beneficial Life, and it does life insurance for the top dogs of the church, and that's all they do. So general authority and above. If their wives die, they get $500,000, and if they die, their wives get a couple $1 million. And this is all
because, of course, the wives aren't worth nearly as much as the husbands.
No,
so
that's true of my planet where I work too. I don't know. We still have to fix some things, but so they had invested, these prophet, seers, and revelators had this for-profit company, and they had invested all of this money that had been paid into the life insurance in Credit default swaps, because that was where to make the money, and they could see that these were great investments with their seer stones and or profitability. That didn't turn out so profitable. So they ended up losing their shirt basically, and they bailed out the Beneficial Life Company with tithing dollars. So you remember how it's supposed to go to build buildings and temples and keep the lights on? It also bails out for-profit industries whenever the church needs it. And I have a timeline again on Exploring Mormonism of tithing bailouts, because it's been doing that from Joseph Smith all the way to today. They will use that as their own little purse whenever they need to.
Whenever it suits them.
Yeah. And no, that's not honest. That's not a good organization.
Yeah.
That's not what we sign up for. Now, if they were honest, they're like, yeah, we use tithing funds sometimes to pay out giant life insurance policies to ourselves, and people still signed up. That's fine. That sort of deception level of like, oh, it's only for buildings. We do the best. There was a ward member. Sorry, I'm going to ramble for a second.
Please do.
A ward member who gave a talk on how we shouldn't contribute to the Red Cross or the Utah Food Bank. We should only give money to fast offering and to the church because we know it makes it to the people who need it most.
The Utah Food Bank is ran by the LDS Church.
So and it was just painful because of course it doesn't. It does. You have no visibility.
Yeah.
Right.
CharityWatch.org, anything with a B and above, you could probably contribute to and feel really good about yourself. And the LDS Church, if it were on there, wouldn't make an F.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just terrible. So that's it's really hard for me when people say this is a good organization. No, if they are stealing and lying and using that money for personal gain, we've left good.
Yeah, I had one of my old bosses who is very LDS and is a nice guy, but I think has just been completely duped by and he's really brilliant, which is what kills me. So I think he's just completely duped by the church. He sent me a friend request on Facebook. I don't know, it's probably been 7 or 8 months ago now. And it was probably 3 or 4 months ago that kind of out of the blue, I got a message from him on Facebook. He didn't post on my wall or anything. Of course, it was a private message that he sent to me, and he said, Hey, buddy, what's going on? I know, that you don't really have the highest opinion of the LDS Church, but I wondered if you had seen this article. And he gave me a link to an article about the church donating $25 million or something for Haiti, or it was some other foreign country where they were helping because of some humanitarian need, and he's like, $25 million, that's a whole lot of money, and I instantly shot back, and I'm like, well, yeah, but when you look at the overall rake that they take from their tithings, this is 0.001% of their annual amount that they receive only from tithing, not from any of their financial properties, not from any of their investments, only from tithing, and it's less than 1/1000th of 1%, and I'm supposed to think that is great and wonderful. Sure, it's good that they're helping people, but they could do a hell of a lot more. So, thanks for sending me the article, but I should point these things out to you so that you don't go around thinking that your church is making this huge sacrifice and donating $25 million out of its billions of dollars that it has in holdings and liquid assets.
For those of you at home with calculators, that's $9 per member per year.
And I'd actually had an argument with a guy at work a couple years back about this kind of situation, because he was saying it's best to donate to like the Catholic Church or the religious organization, because they're always the first ones to get in there and help people during a natural disaster. So I'm like, bullshit. I'm like, let's look this up. And you go, I'm going to use something called facts.
These may be foreign to you. Let me explain. Do you know what a fact is?
So I get on the internet and I start looking. I look up for timelines for when different organizations and when like responses were got to like Haiti and all these natural disasters. And I'm like, oh, well, I see first the local military showed up and the navies, then like European countries showed up, then the American military and stuff showed up, all this aid showed up. I'm like, wow, the last ones to show up always are the religious organizations. They're the last ones in.
That doesn't sound
good. So they're always the first ones there to help. I'm like, according to this, they're always the last motherfuckers there to show up to do anything.
And they pass out Bibles instead of food.
And that's what I pointed out to him. Like, oh, and here is exactly what the Catholic Church donated. And I think it was the Haiti one. Like, 20,000 rosaries, 10,000 Bibles, 100 sheets.
Yeah, that ought to feed and clothe me and give me shelter for the next foreseeable period.
But we're not saving their lives. We're saving their souls.
Which is so much more important in the grand scheme of things. We're talking about eternity.
Just like karma at Reddit. It may...
And the reason why their Bibles and rosaries and blankets are probably the last things to get there is because they're the least needed things to fucking show up.
It's a sales pitch that's coming after the people that are actually surviving.
It is.
Yeah, and that's...
And then when they argue, say, well, they build schools and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, they build churches where they have their own missionaries show up and teach them their religion.
Yeah.
That's not the same as having a school where you're actually learning facts, where you're learning math and science and history.
It's a religious school. It says school right there, Ryan. Come on.
Or the other one I've been seeing there. Well, I don't know how I feel about this though. There's groups that do like textile stuff where they, instead of having it built in like a factory over in China or India, they have villages over like Africa or in small communities that build clothes, and they sell the clothes in the U.S. and the people get a little bit of chunk of the profit. Now the people in the U.S. running these companies are making a hell of a fucking lot of money off of these people.
Yeah, uh-huh. And you're not sure how you feel about this?
Well, but the reason why I say that because these people are making more money than they would normally, and a lot of times they're reinvesting back into these communities and actually building schools and building homes that aren't affiliated with any religions. Like, no, here's a place where you go to school.
We've upgraded you from a mud hut to a wood hut.
I mean, pretty much, but they're giving these people amenities they wouldn't have been able to get any other way, and they are investing a lot of money back to them, but it's kind of like, well, you're kind of using these people for their cheap labor and
slave
using
labor,
it as while you're making millions.
It's so American it hurts.
But at the same time, if these people weren't doing it, they might not have had the opportunity to actually be able to, have a steady job, making something, doing something they like, and be able to actually...
How very wide of them. And if we hadn't fed and clothed and given shelter to all of those slaves, just imagine how horrible their lives would have been.
Well, but we're not taking them here. These are people that already do this. It's like they're making like their local garments they normally make anyways, but they're selling them in small shops in America.
Now, in defense of Mormons, and I do need to step in, I had a boss who served his mission in Haiti when the whole hurricane came through. He got together his old mission buddies. They got their own money, and they flew there, and they worked darn hard for people that they knew that had been impacted to fix things. The people are good. It's just the organization that's a problem.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's...
Well, I think that's where people get us atheists wrong a lot of times. It's like, we're not attacking you. We're not attacking the actual physical theist. We're attacking your belief, but we're attacking more the system behind which you get your beliefs from, because it's
horseshit.
It's horseshit.
Damaging. It hurts other people.
And sometimes it makes you think shitty things and
it
do
hurts
shitty things other people.
You're a victim of this without even realizing it. You have ultimate Stockholm syndrome going on here.
Like that crazy Christian that I've commented about a few times. He had this long rant on Facebook yesterday. I was just going through it, and I'm like, you are fucking more nuts than I thought you were. He was going off on how people thought he made a comment about The Walking Dead and how you can't watch it anymore because it's too political and too liberal. And all. I know. It was crazy to start with. Yeah, I know. I told you this guy's crazy.
Zombie love is forbidden.
But then people started going after him on it, like, hey, but you do this and this and this and this. You're doing the same thing. You're being hypocritical. And then he starts going into, well, you are all just racist. You're just attacking me now because I'm Asian and I'm a Christian. And people are like, no, I'm a Christian too. Like, no, you're not. You're not a Christian. If you were a Christian, you wouldn't be doing this to me right now.
There's no true Asians.
And then he just starts quoting crazy scriptures throughout the whole thing. And it's like, wow, dude, you need help.
Someone has damaged you.
Real help.
And at that point,
mentally,
there's no getting through to people like that.
No.
Pigeons on chessboards.
So you've got your website, and that is
exploringmormonism.com. I mean, it's all informational. There's not a lot. There's a great section called GA bullshit. It's anytime a leader of the church was caught lying from the pulpit and in conference. We've got a section, we've got seminary lessons for the young ones if they want to finish their seminary and learn what was they were lied to that day. I was keeping up with that pretty good this year. I've fallen off a little bit. What's another just good solid? And one of my favorites, I actually paid for this one, so please go watch the video. Which superhero was God the most like? Is he like Peter Parker? Who is like, with great power comes great responsibility. Is he like Batman? Does he wreak justice in the night? And I come to the conclusion that he's most like Magneto, that he threatens the hell out of you, and he will crush anyone except for those who are his ideological followers. Even people like him, he will stomp into the ground to get what he wants. And we actually got an Ian McKellen voiceover doing 3rd Nephi, where Jesus is destroying whole cities in the voice of Magneto with video. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's quite good. You should please enjoy the site. It's just there to learn from. I don't make any money in any sort. So this is a common claim of the apologists, that people write these books or do these things to make money. I have made a total of $100 in lunches and drinks that people have bought me in my entire time since 2007.
I was going to say, I think when we spoke
you are rolling in
2.5, 3-ish years ago, that it was, I think you said $70 or something like that.
So $30 in the last 7 years. Yeah, great. Yeah. No one makes money at this except for maybe Michael Quinn, because he makes whole books. But it's, the apologists on the other side, they get giant checks contributed every time they publish.
So. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't forget those rewards in heaven.
And, and fake internet points. It's
extra
the same.
Cookies.
And then I think you mentioned that you have a book coming out sometime in the future.
Yeah. So I've got two publishers that have just, anytime I get a book done, they're willing to publish it. I've got 2 books that are, one that is ready to go, but I want to add a section. It's called I Should Start a Cult. And it's got a picture of the cat with a newspaper on the front. And it is all about how you can start your very own cult, and it is not Mormon specific in any way, shape, or form, but I'm sure there are lots of people who will be very offended and think I'm talking just about them. And it has, I want to add, this is why it hasn't been published yet, I want to add your own example cult of the shitheads, and their cult is that the less you poop, the more holy you are. And how to get people to join in and believe this nonsense. And then the other one is called The ABCs of Science and Mormonism, and I've did a set of articles online. You can find those on the Reddit or on my blog, but they were really rough. And so we're going to polish them up. We're going to add pictures. And I also want to do a children's book. So when your Mormon relation gives your kid that ideal little Nephi was a brilliant person too, or we can all believe Joseph Smith book from Deseret Book, you can just turn around and hand them the ABCs of Science and Mormonism. And B is for brass. That we kind of went over that section on here. It's got more in the book, but that's in the children's book will be a really pared down version of Nephi carrying a Volkswagen size brass plate.
So are these going to be out in 2017?
I'm trying. Well, it's probably going to be 2018 beginning.
Okay.
So that's what I'm shooting for.
Well, whenever they do come out, we would be happy to have you back on the show to help promote
Brilliant.
them.
We'll still be around.
Yeah. Let us know what we can do to help. Thank you so much for coming out this evening, man. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Glad to be here. If you have another weird topic you ever want to talk about, I am happy to provide context.
I mean, I learned a lot tonight. Really, I did. I'm not joking there. I'm like, I've never heard half of these stories.
And yet, how many, were you in the church?
No, I wasn't. I never even knew about Mormonism until I came here to Utah.
So, Dan, how many years were you in the church?
I was a member, well, I was in the church, I mean, up until I removed my name from the records 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I wasn't regularly attending. I stopped regularly attending just after I was baptized.
Okay, so I've had 35-year-olds, 3.5 decades in the church, born, raised, went on missions, who say the same thing. I've never heard any of this before. So it's.
I met a guy at the Provo Pride Festival in his 50s who said that he had just recently left the church, had been serving as a stake president, and had just recently left the church and was there at the the Provo Pride Festival.
Very cool. Very cool.
So it happens at all ages and stages of life, man. So once again, though, thank you so much for coming on.
Glad to do it.
And we will be sure to have you back in the future when your books come out so we can help get those promoted. And until we chat at you all next week, be good, be nice, be fine, be happy, and hopefully we're not living in a post-apocalyptic hellscape after Donald Trump has assumed the presidency. So, We'll find out tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Say goodbye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
How much is that book worth when the world ends?
$1.95, unless you can get a bunch of fools to believe in it, and then it's priceless.
Yes! 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 Should we have a moment of silence? You probably wonder what that. That's just so I can. That's so I have something where I can clear up any of the electrostatic.
I gotcha. I was like, wow, very religious atheist. I'm good. This is not what I expected. Thank you for the food. Strengthen and nourishing.
It's getting a little stuffy.
This is church stuff I've never even heard anybody talk about.
No. Yeah, we try to produce a fairly cleanish sounding show.
Because we are not clean. She said I say fuck every other word. And I'm like, no, I don't. It depends on what we're talking about, though, because sometimes we can get pretty sweary.
Oh, fuck. No, I fucking don't. That's fucking crazy.